They laughed when the servant girl walked alone into bandit territory. They stopped laughing when she left 5 armed men bleeding in the snow. And that was just the beginning. Welcome to a story of survival, vengeance, and power reclaimed in the most brutal way imaginable. If you want to see how an exiled Luna destroys everyone who underestimated her, stick around until the end. And don't forget to hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. Now, let's begin. The wind screamed across the northern reach like a living thing, tearing through the pine forests and hurling snow against the frozen ground with relentless fury. It was the kind of cold that didn't just chill. It killed. Slowly, methodically, without mercy. Kayla Vorn pulled her threadbare cloak tighter around her shoulders and kept walking. Her boots crunched through the ice-crusted snow, each step deliberate, measured. She moved with the steady rhythm of someone who had learned long ago that survival wasn't about speed. It was about endurance, about outlasting the storm, the hunger, the enemies who thought you were already dead. She looked like nothing. A servant girl, maybe. A refugee. Someone's discarded sister or forgotten daughter, wandering the wilderness alone because she had nowhere else to go. Her cloak was patched and faded. Her hair hung in simple braids beneath a wool cap, and her hands, rough and reddened from cold, gripped a walking stick worn smooth by years of use. She looked harmless. She looked weak. She looked like prey. And that, Kayla had learned, was the most dangerous thing a person could look like in the northern reach. The forest grew denser as the trail narrowed, ancient pines looming on either side like silent sentinels. Kayla's breath misted in the frigid air, her sharp gray eyes scanning the terrain with a focus most people reserved for hunting dangerous game. But she wasn't hunting, not yet. The sun hung low and pale on the horizon, barely cutting through the thick cloud cover. In another hour, full darkness would fall, and with it, the temperature would plummet even further. Kayla knew she needed shelter before then. A cave, an abandoned hunter's shack, anything with walls and a roof. But she also knew she wasn't alone. She'd felt them for the last half mile, the prickling awareness at the back of her neck, the unnatural silence of the birds, the too careful spacing of footsteps in the snow behind her. 5 men, maybe 6, moving parallel to the trail, staying just out of sight among the trees. They thought they were being clever. Kayla almost smiled. She kept walking, her pace unchanged, her expression calm. Let them think she hadn't noticed. Let them believe she was just another frightened girl, lost and vulnerable, stumbling through the wilderness without protection. Let them come closer. The trail opened into a small clearing, a natural bowl surrounded by dense forest on 3 sides, and a sheer rock face on the 4th. It was a perfect trap. No escape routes, no cover, nowhere to run. Kayla stopped in the center of the clearing and set down her walking stick. Then she waited. For a long moment, nothing happened. The wind howled, snow swirled, and the forest held its breath. Then they emerged. 5 men stepped out from the tree line, spreading out in a loose semicircle around her. They wore mismatched armor, leather and fur, scavenged mail, stolen blades. Bandits. Deserters, maybe, or exiles who'd banded together because it was easier to survive as a pack than alone. The leader was a broad-shouldered brute with a scar running from his temple to his jaw and a battle axe slung across his back. He grinned as he approached, showing yellowed teeth. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice thick with mockery. "What do we have here? A little lost lamb all alone in the big bad woods." The others laughed, harsh, ugly sounds that echoed off the rocks. Kayla didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, hands loose at her sides, watching them with those steady gray eyes. The leader's grin widened. "Not much of a talker, are you? That's all right. We don't need you to talk." He took another step forward, close enough now that Kayla could smell the stale alcohol on his breath. "We just need you to hand over whatever you've got in that pack. Food, coin, whatever. Then maybe, we let you walk away." "Maybe?" Kayla's voice was soft, almost conversational. That doesn't sound like much of a guarantee. The leader blinked, surprised that she'd spoken at all. Then he laughed again, louder this time. "You got spirit, I'll give you that. But spirit don't mean much when you're outnumbered 5-1, sweetheart." 5-1, Kayla repeated thoughtfully. She tilted her head slightly as if considering the math. "You're right. That's not fair." The leader's grin faltered. "What?" It's not fair, Kayla said again, her tone perfectly calm. For you. The clearing went very still. For one heartbeat, nobody moved. The bandits stared at her, confused, trying to process what she'd just said. The leader's hand drifted toward the axe on his back, uncertainty flickering across his scarred face. And then Kayla moved. She didn't charge, didn't shout or posture or give any warning at all. She simply stepped forward, faster than the human eye could track, and drove the heel of her palm into the leader's solar plexus with surgical precision. The air exploded out of his lungs in a shocked wheeze. His eyes went wide, mouth opening and closing like a fish drowning in air. Before he could even process what had happened, Kayla's other hand shot up, fingers locking around his wrist as he fumbled for his axe. She twisted, hard, and the crack of breaking bone echoed through the clearing. The leader screamed. Kayla spun him around, using his own momentum against him, and slammed him face first into the frozen ground. He hit hard, the impact driving what little air remained in his lungs out in a strangled gasp, and then went limp. The whole thing took 3 seconds. The other 4 bandits stood frozen, staring in disbelief at their leader's crumpled form. Then one of them, a wiry man with a patchy beard and a rusted sword, let out a roar of rage and charged. Kayla sidestepped the wild swing with minimal effort, caught his sword arm as it passed, and used his own momentum to flip him over her hip. He landed hard on his back, the breath driven from his body, and Kayla stomped down on his wrist. Bones crunched. The sword fell from nerveless fingers. The third man, smarter than the others, tried to circle around behind her, but Kayla had already tracked his movement, heard the crunch of his boots in the snow, calculated the angle of his approach. As he lunged, she dropped low, swept his legs out from under him, and drove her elbow into the back of his neck as he fell. He hit the ground and didn't get up. The last 2 hesitated, glancing at each other, weighing their options. They could run. They should run. But pride and greed were powerful motivators, and they'd already committed to the attack. They came at her together, trying to overwhelm her with numbers. It didn't work. Kayla ducked under a wild haymaker, stepped inside the attacker's guard, and delivered a precise strike to his kidney that dropped him to his knees, gasping. The final bandit swung a club at her head, but she caught it mid-swing, twisted it out of his grip, and cracked it across his temple hard enough to send him sprawling into the snow. Silence fell over the clearing. 5 men lay scattered across the frozen ground, unconscious, moaning, clutching broken bones. Not dead. Kayla didn't kill unless she had to, but thoroughly, undeniably broken. She stood in the center of the carnage, breathing steady, not even winded. Snow had begun to fall again, dusting her shoulders and hair with white. She looked down at the leader, who was groaning weakly, trying to push himself up on his one good arm. Kayla crouched beside him, her voice soft. You made 2 mistakes today. First, you assumed I was helpless. Second, you assumed I was alone. The leader's eyes widened in fear. Who are you? Kayla didn't answer. She just stood, retrieved her walking stick, and continued across the clearing toward the far side of the forest. She didn't look back. High on the ridge above the clearing, hidden among the rocks and shadows, Alpha King Darius Thorn lowered his field glass and exhaled slowly. He'd been tracking the bandits for 2 days, following reports of attacks on travelers along the northern trade route. He'd expected to find them harassing merchants or ambushing lone hunters. He hadn't expected to find a single woman dismantling 5 armed men with the efficiency of a trained assassin. Sir? The voice belonged to Captain Ridian, Darius's second-in-command, who stood a few paces behind him, hand resting on his sword hilt. Should we intervene? No need, Darius said quietly, his eyes still fixed on the woman as she disappeared into the trees. She handled it. Ridian frowned, peering down at the clearing where the bandits were beginning to stir, groaning and cursing. Who is she? I don't know, Darius admitted, and that bothered him more than he cared to admit. He knew everyone of consequence in the Northern Reach, every alpha, every pack leader, every notable warrior or strategist. He made it his business to know. But this woman, this quiet, unassuming figure who'd just dismantled 5 men without breaking a sweat, was a complete unknown. She moved like a soldier. No, more than that. She moved like someone who'd been trained by the best and had survived long enough to perfect those skills in actual combat. Her strikes had been precise, controlled, designed to incapacitate without killing. That spoke of discipline, of restraint. And restraint, in Darius's experience, was far more dangerous than raw brutality. "Follow her," Darius said, rising to his feet. "But keep your distance. I want to know where she's going." Rydian nodded and signaled to the two scouts waiting in the shadows. They melted into the forest like ghosts, silent and invisible. Darius stood on the ridge a moment longer, watching the spot where the woman had vanished. Something about her nagged at him, a familiarity he couldn't quite place, like a half-remembered dream or a song whose lyrics he'd forgotten. He'd seen pain before. Loss. Grief. He carried enough of it himself to recognize the weight when he saw it in someone else's eyes. And he'd seen it in hers just for a moment when she'd looked down at the bandit leader. Not anger, not hatred, just a deep, bone-weary sadness that came from surviving things that should have killed you. Darius knew that look. He wore it himself every time he looked in a mirror. "Sir?" Rydian's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Are you all right?" "Fine," Darius said curtly. He turned away from the ridge and started down the trail toward where his men had left the horses. "Send a patrol to collect those bandits. Lock them up until the magistrate can deal with them." "And the woman?" Darius paused, glancing back over his shoulder one last time. "We watch, and we wait. If she's who I think she might be—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Just find out where she goes." Ruthless. Kayla walked for another hour before she found suitable shelter. A small cave tucked into the side of a cliff, partially hidden by an overhang of rock and dense brambles. It wasn't much, but it was dry and defensible, and that was all she needed. She cleared the entrance of debris, checked for animal tracks or recent occupation, and then settled in for the night. A small fire, carefully shielded from the wind and built with dry wood that produced minimal smoke, provided warmth and light. She pulled a piece of hard bread and dried meat from her pack and ate slowly, methodically, savoring every bite, not because it tasted good, it didn't, but because she'd learned long ago not to waste food. Survival was about small disciplines, small victories, eating when you could, sleeping when it was safe, staying sharp, staying ready, never letting your guard down. Because the moment you did, the moment you believed you were safe, that's when the world reminded you how fragile safety really was. Kayla finished her meager meal and leaned back against the cave wall, staring into the fire. The flames danced and flickered, casting shifting shadows across the stone, and for just a moment she let herself remember. Not the massacre. Not the blood and screaming and the way her world had burned to ash in a single night. Those memories were always there, lurking at the edges of her mind like wolves circling a dying fire. But she'd learned to keep them at bay, to lock them away in the dark places where they couldn't touch her. No, what she remembered now were the small things. Her mother's laugh, the way her father's voice rumbled like distant thunder when he told stories by the hearth, the warmth of her little brother's hand in hers as they walked through the forest on summer evenings, the things she'd lost, the things that had been stolen from her. Kayla closed her eyes, forcing the memories back down. There was no point in dwelling on the past. It was gone. Dead and buried, just like everyone she'd loved. All that mattered now was moving forward, surviving. And when the time came, when she was strong enough, smart enough, prepared enough, taking back what had been stolen. She opened her eyes and stared into the fire, her jaw set, her gray eyes hard as winter ice. Soon, she thought, soon, Ravik Draven would pay for what he'd done. But not yet. Not until she was ready. And when that day came, he would see exactly what kind of monster he'd created when he'd left her alive. Miles away, in the fortress of Blackpine Hold, Alpha King Darius Thorne sat alone in his study, staring at a map spread across his desk. The northern reach was a harsh, unforgiving territory, hundreds of square miles of mountains, forests, and frozen tundra, dotted with small settlements and packed territories that had spent centuries fighting over resources, borders, and pride. Darius had inherited a fractured kingdom, weakened by internal conflict and external threats, and he'd spent the last 5 years trying to hold it together through sheer force of will. It was exhausting and lonely. He'd lost his mate 3 years ago, not to violence or betrayal, but to sickness. A fever that had swept through the region one brutal winter, claiming dozens of lives before it finally burned itself out. He'd held her hand as she slipped away, whispering promises he couldn't keep, swearing oaths he couldn't fulfill. And when she was gone, he'd buried his grief beneath duty and responsibility, because that was what an alpha did. You carried the weight. You protected the pack. You didn't break, no matter how much you wanted to. But tonight, staring at that map, feeling the weight of every decision and every failure pressing down on his shoulders, Darius felt the cracks spreading. He needed something, someone. Not a replacement. You couldn't replace what he'd lost. But maybe an ally, a partner, someone strong enough to share the burden. The woman in the clearing flashed through his mind again, those steady gray eyes, that calm, controlled violence, the way she'd moved like a shadow made flesh. Who was she? And why did he feel like he was supposed to know? A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Enter. Captain Ridian stepped inside, his expression carefully neutral. The scouts have returned, sir. Darius straightened. And? The woman made camp in a cave about 10 miles northeast of the ambush site. She's alone, no signs of companions or pack affiliation. Did they get close enough to identify her? Ridian hesitated. Not exactly. But one of the scouts, Mara, she said something strange. Darius raised an eyebrow. Strange how? She said the woman's scent was familiar, old, like something she'd encountered years ago but couldn't quite place. Darius's pulse quickened. Scent memory was powerful among their kind. It lingered long after faces were forgotten, tied to emotion and instinct in ways that were almost impossible to fake or hide. If Mara recognized the scent even faintly, that meant the woman had been in the Northern Reach before. Recently enough to leave an impression, but long enough ago that the memory had faded. Where did Mara encounter it? Darius asked. Sure, she says it's like trying to remember a dream. The harder she tries, the more it slips away. Darius drummed his fingers on the desk, thinking, tell Mara to keep working on it, and have the scouts continue surveillance. I want to know everywhere this woman goes, everyone she talks to, everything she does. Sir? Ridian hesitated. Forgive me, but why the interest? She's clearly skilled, but the Reach has no shortage of dangerous loners. What makes her different? Darius didn't answer immediately. He looked back down at the map, at the sprawling wilderness that was his responsibility, his burden, his kingdom. Because, he said finally, his voice quiet but firm, someone who can take down 5 armed men without breaking a sweat, and then walk away like it was nothing? That's not just skill, Ridian. That's training, experience, purpose. He looked up, meeting his captain's eyes. And people with that much purpose don't just wander the wilderness alone unless they're running from something, or hunting it. Ridian nodded slowly. Understood, sir. We'll keep watch. Good. Dismissed. The captain left, closing the door softly behind him. Darius turned back to the map, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying the fight in the clearing over and over again. There was something about the woman, something he couldn't shake, and whether she knew it or not, their paths were about to cross. 3 days of careful tracking brought Kayla to the edges of Black Pine Hold just as dawn broke over the mountains. She crouched in the shadow of a massive pine, studying the fortress through the early morning mist. It was larger than she'd expected, a sprawling complex of stone towers and timber halls built into the mountainside itself, surrounded by walls thick enough to withstand siege engines. Smoke rose from dozens of chimneys, and even from this distance she could hear the sounds of a settlement waking up. Voices calling out, hammers ringing against anvils, the low rumble of carts moving through cobbled streets. This was the seat of Alpha King Darius Thorne's power, the heart of the Northern Reach. And if Kayla's carefully gathered intelligence was correct, it was also where she'd find the resources she needed to finish what she'd started. She'd spent the last 3 years preparing for this moment, learning, training, building a network of informants and allies who owed her favors or feared her enough to provide information. She knew which packs had remained loyal to her family's memory and which had bent the knee to Ravik Draven out of fear or opportunism. She knew the trade routes, the supply lines, the political tensions that kept the Northern Reach perpetually on the edge of civil war. But knowledge alone wouldn't be enough to bring down Ravik. She needed allies. real ones, and that meant taking the biggest risk she'd faced since the night her family died. It meant walking into Darius Thorne's fortress and revealing herself. Not completely, not yet, but enough to get his attention, enough to make him see her as something more than a wandering refugee. Kayla took a slow breath, steadying her nerves. This was the moment everything changed. Once she walked through those gates, there would be no going back. No more hiding in the shadows, no more pretending to be invisible. She stood, adjusted her pack, and started down the mountain toward the fortress. The guards at the main gate watched her approach with the wary suspicion of men who'd seen too much violence to trust anyone they didn't recognize. They were young but hard-eyed, hands resting casually on sword hilts as Kayla walked up the final stretch of road. "Hold there!" the taller one called out, stepping forward to block her path. "State your business." Kayla stopped a respectful distance away, keeping her hands visible and her posture non-threatening. "I'm seeking shelter and work. I heard the hold takes in travelers who can earn their keep." The guard's eyes narrowed, scanning her from head to foot. "You got any skills? We don't need more beggars." "I can hunt, track, and fight," Kayla said evenly, "and I know how to keep my mouth shut when it matters." The second guard snorted. "Yeah? You and every other drifter who comes through here. What makes you special?" Kayla met his gaze without flinching. "Try me. Put me in your training yard for one round against anyone you choose. If I lose, I'll leave. If I win, I get a bed and a meal while I figure out my next move." The guards exchanged glances. The taller one scratched his jaw, considering. "That's a bold offer. You sure you want to make it? Some of our fighters don't pull punches, even in practice." "Neither do I," Kayla said. Something in her tone, the absolute certainty, the quiet confidence, made the guard pause. He studied her face for a long moment, then shrugged. "All right. Wait here." He disappeared through the gate while the second guard kept watch. Kayla stood perfectly still, letting the minutes stretch out, keeping her breathing steady and her expression calm. She was taking a calculated risk. If someone recognized her, if anyone who'd served under her father or witnessed the massacre was stationed here, it could all fall apart before it began. But she'd changed enough in 3 years that she was betting on anonymity. The girl who'd fled Ravik's assault had been 14, soft from a sheltered life, her hair long and decorated with the ornaments befitting a Luna's daughter. The woman standing at these gates was 27 in experience, if not in years, lean and scarred, her hair chopped short and her eyes hard as winter steel. No one would connect the two unless they were looking for the connection. The tall guard returned with a grizzled veteran whose left arm ended in a stump just below the elbow. The veteran looked Kayla up and down with the assessing gaze of someone who'd spent decades evaluating fighters. "This the one?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Says she can fight. Wants to prove it." The veteran grunted. "Follow me." He led them through the gate and into the fortress proper. Blackpine Hold was a city unto itself, narrow streets lined with workshops and barracks, market stalls already opening for morning trade, training yards where warriors drilled in formations. The air smelled of wood smoke, leather, and steel. And everywhere, people watched Kayla with suspicion. She felt their eyes tracking her as she followed the veteran through the winding streets. Whispers followed in her wake, too quiet to hear clearly, but the tone was unmistakable. Who was she? Where had she come from? What did she want? Outsiders weren't welcome here. Not really. The Northern Reach had been at war, hot or cold, for generations, and trust was a luxury no one could afford. The training yard was a wide-open space surrounded by wooden fences, the ground packed hard from countless boots and scarred with the marks of weapons practice. A dozen warriors were already at work, sparring in pairs, running drills, testing their strength against weighted stones and iron bars. They all stopped when Kayla entered, turning to stare. "We got a volunteer," the veteran announced, his voice carrying across the yard. "New arrival wants to prove she's worth feeding. Who wants to test her?" Silence. Then a low chuckle from the far side of the yard. A woman stepped forward, tall and powerfully built, with short-cropped dark hair and a jagged scar running down the left side of her face. She wore training leathers and carried herself with the easy confidence of someone who'd never lost a fight she couldn't walk away from. "I'll do it," she said, grinning. "Been a while since we had fresh meat." The other warriors laughed, forming a loose circle around the yard. Kayla recognized the dynamic instantly. This was a test, yes, but also entertainment. A chance to see the outsider put in her place, reminded that Black Pine Hole didn't belong to drifters and wanderers. The veteran gestured to a rack of practice weapons. Choose your blade. Kayla selected a simple wooden training sword, testing its weight and balance. It was heavier than she'd have liked, the grip worn smooth by countless hands, but serviceable. Her opponent, the scarred woman, chose a pair of shorter blades, spinning them experimentally before settling into a ready stance. "Name's Kara," she said, still grinning. "I'll try not to break anything permanent." Kayla didn't respond. She just moved to the center of the yard and waited. The veteran raised his hand. "Standard rules. First blood or submission. Begin." Kara came in fast, both blades flashing in a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm through speed and aggression. It was a good strategy, against most opponents. But Kayla had been trained by the best swordmasters in the Northern Reach before her world fell apart, and she'd spent 3 years refining those skills through necessity and survival. She sidestepped the first strike, parried the second, and used Kara's momentum to spin her off balance. Kara recovered quickly, credit where it was due, and pressed the attack, forcing Kayla to give ground as the twin blades came at her from multiple angles. The watching warriors cheered and shouted advice, the noise building to a dull roar. Kayla blocked, dodged, redirected, letting Kara burn energy while she conserved her own. She could see the pattern in her opponent's movements now, a tendency to favor the left blade for finishing strikes, a half-second tell before she committed to a high attack. Weaknesses. Everyone had them. Kara lunged, both blades thrusting forward in a double strike aimed at Kayla's midsection. It was a killing blow in a real fight, and exactly the opening Kayla had been waiting for. She twisted sideways, let the blades pass harmlessly by, and brought her wooden sword down hard on Kara's extended wrists. Not hard enough to break bone, this was practice after all, but hard enough to send both training blades clattering to the ground. Before Kara could recover, Kayla's sword was at her throat. Silence crashed over the training yard. Kara stood frozen, eyes wide, breathing hard. Then slowly she raised her hands in surrender. "Yield." Kayla lowered her blade and stepped back. The veteran was staring at her with an expression somewhere between surprise and calculation. "Where'd you learn to fight like that?" "Here and there," Kayla said, keeping her voice neutral. "I've traveled a lot." "Clearly," he gestured to Kara, who was rubbing her wrists and scowling. "You good?" "Fine," Kara muttered. She shot Kayla a look that was equal parts respect and irritation. "You're faster than you look." "I get that a lot." The veteran turned back to Kayla, studying her with renewed interest. "All right, you've earned your trial. Report to the quartermaster for bunk assignment and meal vouchers. You'll work stable duty for now while we figure out where you fit." Kayla nodded. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," the veteran said. "You just made yourself interesting. Around here, that's not always a good thing." He walked away, barking orders at the other warriors to get back to work. The crowd dispersed, though Kayla could feel their eyes on her as she left the training yard. She'd cleared the first hurdle. She was inside the fortress with a legitimate reason to stay, but she'd also drawn attention, exactly what she'd been trying to avoid. And somewhere in this fortress, Alpha King Darius Thorne was watching. She could feel it. The quartermaster was a foul-tempered older man who assigned Kayla a bunk in the common barracks and handed her meal vouchers with all the warmth of someone passing out prison rations. The bunk was a narrow cot in a room shared with 24 other low-ranking workers, servants, laborers, and guards in training who hadn't yet earned private quarters. It was loud, crowded, and smelled of unwashed bodies and cheap soap. It was perfect. Kayla stowed her meager belongings under the cot and spent the rest of the day learning the layout of the fortress. She worked her assigned stable shift, mucking out stalls and hauling feed, while keeping her eyes and ears open. The fortress ran on routine and hierarchy. The Alpha King's inner circle occupied the central tower, the elite guards and advisors lived in the officers' quarters, and everyone else was scattered throughout the outer rings according to rank and function. But what interested Kayla most were the gaps in security, the blind spots where patrol routes didn't quite overlap, the storage rooms that saw minimal traffic, the sections of wall where guards grew complacent because nothing ever happened. Every fortress had them. You just had to know how to look. By nightfall, she'd mapped out 3 potential routes that could be used to move through the fortress undetected if she needed to. Not that she planned to use them, not yet, but survival was about preparation. She was heading back to the barracks after finishing her shift when she heard raised voices coming from one of the side courtyards. Curiosity overrode caution. Kayla slowed her pace, drifting toward the sound. A small crowd had gathered in the courtyard, mostly servants and off-duty guards, forming a loose circle around 2 figures. One was a young boy, maybe 10 years old, with tears streaming down his face and a bloody nose. The other was a sneering guard in his mid-20s, arms crossed over his chest, looking down at the boy with undisguised contempt. "I told you to watch where you're going, brat," the guard was saying. "Maybe next time you'll pay attention." "I said I was sorry," the boy choked out. "I didn't mean to. Don't care what you meant. You spilled my drink. Now you're going to clean it up. On your hands and knees. Like the little rat you are." The crowd murmured, but no one stepped forward. Kayla could see it in their faces. Anger, sympathy, but also fear. The guard wore the insignia of the Alpha's personal detail. Crossing him meant risking more than a reprimand. The boy dropped to his knees, sobbing, and started wiping up the spilled ale with his bare hands. Kayla felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. She'd seen this before. In her father's court, in the months leading up to the massacre, when certain wolves had started testing boundaries, pushing to see how much cruelty they could get away with before someone pushed back. Her father had put a stop to it, swiftly, decisively. But her father was dead. Kayla stepped into the circle. "That's enough," she said quietly. The guard's head snapped around. "Excuse me?" "I said that's enough." Kayla moved between the guard and the boy, her posture relaxed but her eyes hard. He apologized. "He's cleaning up the mess. You've made your point." The guard's face darkened. "Who the hell are you to tell me anything?" Someone who thinks a grown warrior picking on a child is pathetic. The crowd went very still. The guard took a step forward, his hand dropping to his sword hilt. "You want to repeat that?" Kayla held his gaze. "You heard me the first time." For a moment, violence hung in the air like a drawn blade. The guard's fingers twitched on his sword, his jaw clenched tight, weighing whether it was worth the trouble. Then a new voice cut through the tension. "Stand down, Torvin!" Everyone turned. Alpha King Darius Thorne stood at the entrance to the courtyard, flanked by Captain Ridian and 2 other guards. He was taller than Kayla had expected, broad-shouldered and battle-scarred, with dark hair shot through with gray and eyes the color of storm clouds. He radiated authority, not the petty bullying kind, but the quiet, absolute power of someone who didn't need to raise his voice to be obeyed. Torvin immediately stepped back, his hand leaving his sword. "Your Majesty, I saw what you were doing," Darius said, his tone flat. "And I saw what she said. She's right. You're dismissed." Torvin's face flushed red, but he didn't argue. He shot Kayla a look of pure hatred, then turned and stalked away. The crowd began to disperse, murmuring amongst themselves. Darius's eyes shifted to Kayla, and for the first time they stood face to face. He studied her in silence for a long moment, and Kayla felt the weight of that gaze like a physical thing, probing, searching, trying to peel back the layers of carefully constructed anonymity. "You're the new arrival," he said finally. It wasn't a question. "Yes, Your Majesty. The one who beat Kara in the training yard this morning. I got lucky." A faint smile tugged at the corner of Darius's mouth. "Kara's one of my best fighters. Luck had nothing to do with it." He gestured to the boy, who was still kneeling on the ground, staring at Kayla with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Help him up." Kayla crouched down and gently pulled the boy to his feet, checking his bloody nose. "You're all right," she murmured. "Go get yourself cleaned up." The boy nodded mutely and ran off. When Kayla straightened, Darius was still watching her. "What's your name?" he asked. "Kayla." She hesitated. "Kayla Vorn." The surname was her mother's, less recognizable than her father's family name, but still rooted in truth. A small risk, but one she had to take if she wanted any chance of building trust. "Kayla Vorn," Darius repeated, as if testing the weight of it. "Where are you from?" "The Eastern Territories originally. I've been on the move for a while." "Running from something or toward it?" The question was casual, but Kayla heard the steel beneath it. This was a man who didn't miss much. Toward something, she said carefully. A place where I can be useful. And you think that place is here? I think, Kayla said slowly, choosing her words with care, that the Northern Reach needs people who are willing to stand up for what's right, even when it's inconvenient. Darius's eyes narrowed slightly. Careful, that sounds dangerously close to judgment. Not judgment, observation. For a moment they stood in silence, the air between them charged with unspoken questions and calculations. Then Darius nodded, as if coming to some internal decision. Captain Rydian will reassign you from stable duty. I want you in the main training rotation starting tomorrow. Let's see if that performance this morning was a fluke or a pattern. Kayla inclined her head. Thank you, Your Majesty. Don't thank me. If you're as good as you seem, you'll earn your place. If you're not, he let the sentence hang, unfinished. Understood. Darius turned to leave, then paused and glanced back over his shoulder. One more thing. Torvin has friends in the guard. Watch your back. I always do. He studied her for one more moment, then walked away, Captain Rydian and the guards falling into step behind him. Kayla stood alone in the courtyard, her heart pounding harder than she cared to admit. That had been closer than she'd liked. Darius was sharp, sharper than the intelligence reports had suggested. If she made one wrong move, said one thing that didn't add up, he'd start digging, and if he dug deep enough, he'd find the truth. But for now, she had clearance. She was in. And tomorrow, she'd begin the real work, building alliances, gathering information, and positioning herself to strike when the moment came. Ravik Draven thought she was dead. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of training, observation, and careful maneuvering. Kayla threw herself into the work, proving her worth on the sparring grounds and earning grudging respect from warriors who'd initially dismissed her as just another drifter. But respect came with scrutiny. She felt eyes on her constantly, Darius's scouts, no doubt, watching her every move. And Torvin's friends made their displeasure known in small, petty ways. Equipment that went missing before drills, assignments to the worst shifts, whispered insults just loud enough to be heard. Kayla endured it all in silence, refusing to be provoked. But the pressure was building. And then, one cold morning, everything changed. She was crossing the main courtyard when she heard the commotion. Shouts, the clatter of hooves, the unmistakable urgency of bad news arriving. A patrol had returned early, their horses lathered and wild-eyed. The lead rider, a young scout named Alara, was practically falling out of her saddle, her face pale and streaked with blood. Darius was there in moments, catching Alara as she stumbled. Report. Attack, Alara gasped. The eastern border, a full war party. They hit Clearwater Settlement at dawn, burned it to the ground. Darius's face went stone hard. Survivors? A handful, mostly children. They're being brought in now. Alara's voice cracked. Your Majesty. It was Ravik Draven's banner. He's coming. The courtyard erupted into chaos, warriors shouting, orders being barked, the frantic scramble of preparation. But Kayla stood frozen, the world narrowing to a single point. Ravik Draven. He was here, in the Northern Reach, burning villages and slaughtering innocents, just like he'd done to her family 3 years ago. And suddenly, all of Kayla's carefully laid plans, the slow, methodical approach, the patient gathering of resources, felt painfully inadequate. Ravik wasn't waiting. He was moving, striking, forcing the confrontation. She had to act, now. Before she could second-guess herself, Kayla strode across the courtyard toward Darius, who was issuing rapid-fire orders to Captain Rydian. Your Majesty. Darius turned, his expression hard. Not now. I can help. I said not now. I know Ravik Draven's tactics, Kayla said, her voice cutting through the noise. I know how he fights, how he moves, where he's vulnerable. Let me ride with the response force. Darius stared at her, his eyes searching her face. How could you possibly know? Because I've fought him before, Kayla said, the lie coming easily because it was wrapped around a core of truth. And I survived. Give me a chance, and I'll make sure your people survive too. The courtyard had gone quiet, warriors turning to stare. Darius's jaw clenched. If you're lying, I'm not. For one breathless moment, Kayla thought he would refuse. Then he nodded curtly. Saddle up. You ride with Rydian's unit. And Kayla? His voice dropped to a deadly whisper. If you get my people killed because you're chasing some personal vendetta, I will end you myself. Kayla met his gaze without flinching. Understood. She turned and ran for the stables, her heart pounding. This was it, the moment she'd been preparing for. Ravik Draven was within reach, and this time she wouldn't let him escape. The ride east was brutal. 40 warriors on horseback, pushing hard through snow-choked mountain passes and frozen streams, the horses' breath coming in white clouds as they climbed higher into the wilderness. Captain Rydian led the column with grim efficiency, his face set like carved stone, while Kayla rode near the rear, hyper-aware of the suspicious glances thrown her way by warriors who still didn't trust the stranger in their ranks. She didn't care. Let them doubt. Let them whisper. All that mattered was reaching Ravik before he vanished back into whatever hole he'd crawled out of. They reached the smoking ruins of Clearwater Settlement just before dusk. The smell hit first, charred wood, burned flesh, the acrid stench of destruction that settled in the back of your throat and refused to leave. Then the sight. Homes reduced to blackened skeletons, bodies scattered in the snow like broken dolls, blood painting the white ground in stark crimson patterns. Kayla's hands tightened on her reins, her jaw clenching so hard her teeth ached. This was Ravik's signature. Maximum devastation, maximum terror. He didn't just kill, he obliterated, leaving nothing behind but ash and memory. Rydian raised his hand, bringing the column to a halt. Spread out, search for survivors, and watch for ambush. This could be bait. The warriors dismounted and moved through the ruins with weapons drawn, checking bodies, searching collapsed buildings. Kayla slid from her saddle and walked slowly through what had been the village center, her eyes cataloging every detail. The attack had been methodical. Buildings fired in a specific sequence to create maximum panic and funnel fleeing villagers toward waiting ambush points. The bodies showed signs of coordinated strikes, warriors working in teams, cutting down anyone who tried to resist or escape. Professional. Military. Ravik had trained his forces well. Here! One of Darius's warriors, a stocky man named Gareth, was kneeling beside a collapsed storehouse. I've got survivors! Kayla ran over, her heart pounding. Gareth was pulling aside charred timbers to reveal a small root cellar beneath the floor. Inside, huddled together in the darkness, were 6 children ranging from maybe 5 to 12 years old, their faces streaked with soot and tears, their eyes wide with terror. It's all right, Gareth said gently, reaching down. We're here to help. Come on out. The oldest, a girl with dark braids and fierce eyes despite her tears, climbed out first, then helped pull the younger ones up. They clung to each other, shaking, too traumatized to speak. Kayla crouched down to their level. Where are your parents? The girl's lip trembled. They told us to hide. They said they'd come back, but... Her voice broke. How many attackers were there? Kayla asked softly. I don't know. Lots? Maybe 20? They had red banners with a black wolf. Ravik's colors. Which way did they go when they left? The girl pointed north toward the deeper mountains. Kayla stood and found Rydian already beside her, his expression dark. He's heading for the high passes. If he makes it through, we lose him. How long ago did they leave? Kayla asked the girl. Maybe 2 hours? I'm not sure. Rydian swore under his breath. We're too far behind. By the time we get the children to safety and regroup, then don't regroup, Kayla interrupted. Take 10 of your fastest riders and pursue now. I'll guide you. The rest can escort the children back to Black Pine Hold. Rydian's eyes narrowed. You said you know his tactics. Prove it. What's he going to do next? Kayla closed her eyes, thinking. Ravik was many things, brutal, cruel, ambitious, but he wasn't reckless. This attack on Clearwater had a purpose beyond simple destruction. He was sending a message. But to who? Then it clicked. He's not running, she said, opening her eyes. He's drawing you out. This whole attack was designed to provoke a response, to get Darius's forces to chase him into the mountains where the terrain favors ambush. So it's a trap. It's a trap, Kayla confirmed. But that doesn't mean we can't spring it. He'll be expecting a large force charging in blind. Give him something different. Rydian studied her for a long moment. What are you suggesting? Small team, fast and quiet. We track them to their ambush point, scout their positions, and then, if the opportunity presents itself, we take Ravik before his people even know what's happening. That's insane. He'll have 20 warriors minimum. Which is why we don't fight them head on, Kayla said. We use the terrain against them, cause chaos, make them think they're under attack from a much larger force. In the confusion, we extract Ravik. Rydian looked like he wanted to argue, but another voice cut in. She's right. Everyone turned. Alpha King Darius Thorn sat astride his massive warhorse at the edge of the settlement, flanked by 4 of his personal guard. He must have left Blackpine Hold shortly after they did, pushing his mount hard to catch up. His eyes locked on Kayla. Ravik wants me to chase him, to be angry and reckless. So we give him the opposite, cold, calculated, and surgical. He dismounted, his boots crunching in the ash-dusted snow. But if we're doing this, I'm leading the extraction team personally. Rydian's eyes widened. Your Majesty, that's not up for debate. Darius's tone left no room for argument. He turned to Kayla. You said you know his tactics. Fine. You're with me. Pick 5 more riders you trust to keep their heads in a fight. Kayla felt the weight of every eye on her. Warriors who'd been fighting beside Rydian for years, watching as this stranger suddenly became the Alpha King's tactical advisor. She didn't hesitate. Kara, Gareth, Alara if her wounds aren't too severe, and 2 of your trackers who know these mountains. Darius nodded. Make it happen. We leave in 10 minutes. The team assembled quickly, 7 warriors total, armed light for speed, carrying minimal supplies. The remaining forces would escort the children back to safety and send word to Blackpine Hold to prepare for potential siege. As Kayla checked her weapons and gear, Kara approached, her scarred face unreadable. I don't know what game you're playing, Kara said quietly, but if you get the Alpha killed, there won't be a hole deep enough for you to hide in. Kayla met her gaze steadily. I'm not playing any games. I just want Ravik Draven dead. Why? What did he do to you? The question hung in the cold air between them. Kayla could have lied, should have lied. But something about the way Kara asked, direct, without judgment, just wanting to understand, made the truth slip out. He murdered my family 3 years ago. Burned them alive while I hid like a coward and listened to them scream. Kara's expression softened fractionally. Then we have something in common. He killed my brother in a border raid 2 years back. She held out her hand. So let's kill the bastard together. Kayla gripped her hand. Deal. They rode north as the last light faded from the sky, following the trail Ravik's war party had left. Intentionally obvious, Kayla noted, meant to be followed. The tracks led up into a narrow canyon with steep walls on either side. Exactly the kind of terrain that turned into a killing box if you weren't careful. Darius raised his hand, signaling a halt. They were still a mile from the canyon entrance, hidden in a dense stand of pines. This is where we go quiet, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. From here on, hand signals only. Kayla, take point with Alara. Find their positions, but don't engage. Kayla nodded and dismounted, Alara falling in beside her. The scout moved like a ghost despite her bandaged ribs, reading the landscape with the ease of someone who'd spent her entire life in these mountains. They crept forward through the darkness, using every scrap of cover, every shadow. The moon was a thin crescent, providing just enough light to navigate without exposing them completely. As they neared the canyon entrance, Alara touched Kayla's arm and pointed. There, positioned along the canyon rim, barely visible in the darkness, were sentries. At least 6 that Kayla could see, probably more further in. But what caught her attention was the camp at the canyon's far end. Firelight flickered against the rock walls, illuminating figures moving around the flames. Ravik's main force. They were exactly where Kayla had predicted they'd be. She and Alara worked their way back to where Darius waited with the others. 6 sentries minimum on the rim, Kayla reported quietly. Main camp about a quarter-mile in. 20 to 25 fighters. Hard to get an exact count. They're confident, lots of noise, big fires, not expecting serious opposition. Overconfident, Darius murmured. Good. That's what we use. He looked at each member of the team in turn. Here's how this works. Kara, Gareth, you take the two trackers and circle around to the far end of the canyon. When you hear my signal, 3 wolf howls, you start making as much noise as possible. Fire arrows, shout, make them think they're being hit by a full company. What's our signal to stop? Gareth asked. When you see fire or hear sustained combat. Then you pull back to the rendezvous point and wait. Don't be heroes. Kara nodded grimly. Understood. Kayla, Ilara, you're with me. While they're distracted by Kara's group, we move in fast, locate Ravik, and extract him. Alive if possible, I want answers. Dead if necessary. What if he's not there? Ilara asked. Then we pull back and reassess. But my gut says he's there. A commander like Ravik doesn't set an ambush without watching it personally. They separated, Kara's group melting into the darkness to circle around while Darius, Kayla, and Ilara prepared for the frontal approach. Waiting was the hardest part. Kayla forced herself to breathe slowly, to stay loose and ready, to not think about the fact that she was about to come face to face with the man who'd destroyed her entire world. Focus. Stay sharp. Emotion was a liability in combat. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably 20 minutes, Darius's signal echoed through the canyon, 3 perfect wolf howls that could have been natural if you weren't listening for them. Chaos erupted at the far end of the canyon, shouts, the whistle of arrows, confused yelling as Ravik's warriors scrambled for weapons, trying to figure out where the attack was coming from. Now, Darius whispered. They moved, fast and silent, staying low, using the confusion and darkness as cover. The sentries on the rim were focused on the commotion at the far end, giving Darius's team precious seconds to slip past undetected. The camp was in disarray, warriors running in all directions, some trying to organize a defense, others just trying to understand what was happening. Kayla's eyes scanned the chaos, looking for one specific figure. There, standing near the largest fire, issuing orders with the calm authority of someone who'd been in 100 ambushes and wasn't rattled by one more, Ravik Draven. He was taller than Kayla remembered, his shoulders broader, his face harder. 3 years had aged him, carved new lines around his mouth and eyes. But it was unmistakably him. The same cold intelligence in his gaze, the same predatory grace in the way he moved. Kayla's hand tightened on her sword hilt. I see him, she breathed. 10 o'clock by the main fire. Darius nodded. Stay close. We get one shot at this. They worked their way through the shadows, skirting the edge of the camp, getting closer. Ravik was shouting orders, trying to organize his confused warriors into something resembling a defensive line. 15 feet away. 10. And then something went wrong. One of Ravik's warriors, a young man with quick eyes, spotted them. His mouth opened to shout a warning. Ilara's arrow took him in the throat before any sound emerged. But the motion had drawn attention, heads turned, eyes locked on them. Now! Darius roared, abandoning stealth for speed. They charged. Kayla went straight for Ravik, her sword already drawn, moving with all the speed and precision she'd spent 3 years perfecting. Warriors tried to intercept her, but she flowed past them like water, redirecting their attacks, using their momentum against them. Ravik saw her coming and his eyes widened, not in fear, but in recognition. Impossible, he breathed, his hand dropping to his sword. You're dead. I watched you burn. You watched wrong, Kayla snarled and attacked. Their blades met with a shriek of steel. Ravik was good, better than good, trained and experienced and utterly ruthless. But Kayla had something he didn't. Rage. Pure, focused, 3 years in the making rage. They fought across the camp, trading strikes that would have killed lesser fighters, moving so fast that the warriors around them could barely follow. Ravik's face twisted with effort and something else, genuine confusion. Who are you? He demanded between strikes. Don't you recognize me? Kayla drove him back with a combination that ended with her blade at his throat. Look closer, Ravik. Look at my eyes. He stared at her and slowly, agonizingly slowly, understanding dawned. His face went white. No, it can't be. Kayla Vorn is... Right here, Kayla finished. Alive, and very, very angry. Around them, the battle had shifted. Darius and Ilara were holding their own, But Ravik's warriors were recovering from the initial shock, organizing, pressing in from all sides. They had maybe 30 seconds before they were overwhelmed. Ravik seemed to realize this at the same moment Kayla did. His eyes flicked to his warriors, calculating odds, weighing options. "Kill them!" he roared. "Kill them all!" The warriors surged forward, and Kayla made a split-second decision. She grabbed Ravik's collar, yanked him off balance, and shouted at the top of her lungs in a voice that carried across the entire canyon. "I am Kayla Vorn, daughter of Alpha Marcus Vorn, rightful Luna of the Silverwood Pack, and I challenge Ravik Draven to single combat for the murder of my family and the theft of my birthright." The camp went dead silent. Every warrior froze. Even the sounds of fighting from Kara's diversion ceased as the words echoed off the canyon walls. In their world, among their people, there were laws older than kingdoms. And the challenge was sacred. A formal public declaration witnessed by both parties that superseded all other conflicts, all other allegiances. To refuse a challenge was to be branded a coward forever. To accept was to bind yourself to its outcome. Ravik stared at her, his expression cycling through shock, rage, and cold calculation. Then he smiled, a terrible, predatory expression that made Kayla's blood run cold. "You want single combat, little Luna?" His voice was soft, almost gentle. "Then you'll have it. At dawn, before all assembled. And when I kill you again, there will be no question of succession, no lingering doubts. Just you, dead in the snow, and the Silverwood Pack remaining mine by right of conquest." He turned to his warriors. "Let them go. We camp here tonight. At dawn, we settle this properly." Darius stepped forward, his face thunderous. "Kayla, what the hell do you think you're—" "I'm ending this," Kayla said, her eyes never leaving Ravik's. "One way or another." "You can't—" "The challenge is issued and accepted," Ravik interrupted smoothly. "Witnessed by both our forces. To interfere now would violate every law we hold sacred. Surely you understand that, Alpha King." Darius's jaw clenched, fury and frustration warring across his face. But Ravik was right. The challenge was binding, sacred. "Stand down!" Darius finally said to his warriors, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Ravik's smile widened. "Wise choice. We'll prepare a proper arena. Dawn breaks in 5 hours. I suggest you all get some rest." His eyes locked on Kayla. "You'll need your strength, little Luna. I promise to make this quick." "Don't make promises you can't keep," Kayla said softly. They backed out of the camp slowly, weapons still drawn, waiting for treachery. But Ravik's warriors let them pass, already beginning to set up torches and clear space for the morning's duel. Only when they were well clear of the canyon did Darius round on Kayla, his eyes blazing. "What were you thinking?" he demanded. "You just committed suicide." "I committed to the only path that ends with Ravik dead and my people free," Kayla shot back. "He's too powerful, too entrenched. I can't fight a war against him. I don't have the resources, the army, the political backing. But I can fight him, one-on-one. Winner takes all. He'll kill you." "Maybe," Kayla said. "Or maybe I'll surprise him. Either way, this ends tomorrow." Darius grabbed her arm, his grip firm but not painful. "Listen to me. I don't know what you are to me yet. Ally, asset, madwoman, but I'm not letting you throw your life away on a revenge fantasy. We can find another way." Kayla met his eyes, and for the first time since entering Black Pine Hold, she let him see the full weight of what she carried. "There is no other way," she said quietly. "I've been dead for 3 years, Darius. Walking, breathing, but dead inside. The only thing keeping me alive is the promise I made to my family's memory, that Ravik would answer for what he did. Tomorrow I keep that promise." She pulled free of his grip. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to prepare." She walked away into the darkness, leaving Darius standing in the snow, surrounded by his warriors, staring after her with an expression somewhere between admiration and despair. Kara appeared at his side, her voice soft. "She's going to die, isn't she?" "I don't know," Darius said, "but I've never seen anyone more ready to find out." The hours before dawn were the longest of Kayla's life. She sat apart from the others, methodically checking her weapons, her armor, running through combat scenarios in her mind. Ravik was bigger, stronger, with reach and weight advantages. He'd spent 3 years consolidating power, training, leading warriors in actual combat. But Kayla had spent 3 years preparing for exactly this moment. She knew his style, aggressive, overwhelming, designed to break opponents psychologically before finishing them physically. She knew his tells, the slight shift in his stance before a power strike, the way he favored his right side. And she knew something else, something he'd never learned because he'd never needed to: how to fight when you had absolutely nothing left to lose. As the first gray light of dawn crept over the mountains, Kayla stood, rolled her shoulders, and walked toward the canyon where her entire future, or her death, waited. Darius fell into step beside her, silent for a long moment. "If you survive this," he said finally, "we need to have a very long conversation about who you really are and why I feel like I should have known all along." Kayla glanced at him, surprised. "You feel it too?" "Like I'm remembering someone I never met." He paused. "Your father, Marcus Vorn. I knew him. We fought together once years ago before he became Alpha. He saved my life during a border skirmish." Kayla's breath caught. He never mentioned it. It was a lifetime ago. Different wars. Different enemies. Darius's voice softened. "He was a good man, honorable, strong. If you're half the warrior he was—" "I'm not," Kayla interrupted. "I'm something else entirely." They reached the canyon entrance. Both camps were assembled, Ravik's warriors on one side, Darius's small force on the other. And in the center, illuminated by the rising sun, a cleared circle of snow-packed earth. The arena. Ravik stood at the far side, already armed and armored, his expression calm and confident. Kayla stepped forward, and the assembled warriors fell silent. This was it. No more running, no more hiding, no more waiting, just her, Ravik, and 3 years of ghosts demanding justice. She drew her sword and walked into the circle, the steel singing as it left the scabbard. Ravik smiled and raised his own blade. "Let's finish what we started, little Luna." The first strike came so fast, Kayla barely blocked it in time. Steel screamed against steel as Ravik's blade crashed down with the force of a falling tree. The impact jolted through Kayla's arms, sending shockwaves up to her shoulders, testing whether 3 years of preparation could stand against raw, brutal power. She gave ground, letting his momentum carry him forward, then sidestepped and countered with a quick slash aimed at his exposed ribs. But Ravik was already moving, twisting away, his own blade arcing back around in a backhand strike that would have taken her head off if she hadn't ducked. The assembled warriors roared, a wall of sound that echoed off the canyon walls. Ravik pressed forward, his attacks coming in relentless waves. High strike, low strike, feint left, then drive right. Each blow powerful enough to shatter bone if it connected. Each one delivered with the confidence of a man who'd killed dozens in single combat and never once doubted the outcome. But Kayla had studied him. For 3 years, she'd collected every story, every account of his fighting style. She knew he opened with overwhelming force, trying to break his opponent's will before their body. Knew he expected fear, hesitation, the moment when survival instinct overrode training and people made mistakes. She gave him none of that. Instead, she moved like water, flowing around his strikes, absorbing the ones she couldn't avoid, never staying in one place long enough to be pinned down. Her own attacks were precise, surgical, targeting joints and tendons and nerve clusters. Not meant to kill, not yet. Meant to accumulate damage, to slow him down. Death by 1,000 cuts. "You've learned some tricks," Ravik said, breathing harder now, a thin line of sweat breaking out on his forehead despite the freezing air. "But tricks won't save you." He came at her with a new combination, a series of strikes so fast they blurred together, each one flowing seamlessly into the next. This was the technique that had made him feared throughout the Northern Reach, the skill that had allowed him to cut down Kayla's father, despite Marcus Vorn's legendary prowess. The Reaper's Dance, they called it. Once it started, it didn't stop until someone was dead. Kayla met it head-on. Block, parry, redirect. Her blade moved in perfect counterpoint to his, reading the rhythm of his attack, finding the spaces between strikes. She'd watched recordings of this technique, studied every variation, drilled against it with practice partners until her muscles knew the response without conscious thought. And now she did something Ravik had never seen before. She stepped inside his guard, too close for his long blade to be effective, and drove her elbow into his solar plexus. The air exploded from Ravik's lungs. His eyes went wide with shock. Before he could recover, Kayla spun, her blade flashing in a tight arc that opened a shallow cut across his cheek. First blood. The crowd's roar intensified, half in approval, half in disbelief. Ravik staggered back, one hand going to his bleeding cheek, his expression cycling through surprise, rage, and for just a moment, something that looked almost like respect. "Who trained you?" he demanded. "Everyone you ever killed," Kayla said quietly. "Their memories, their techniques, their styles. I collected them all. Every warrior who fell to your blade became my teacher." She advanced now, taking the offensive for the first time. Her strikes were controlled, measured, probing for weaknesses, and she found them. A slight favoring of his right knee, old injury, probably from a fall or bad landing. A fractional delay when transitioning from high to low attacks, the way his grip loosened microscopically when he overextended. Tiny flaws, almost invisible, but in a fight between masters, tiny flaws were enough. Kayla exploited each one ruthlessly. A quick strike to the right knee that made Ravik's leg buckle. A slash that forced him to overextend, followed by a pommel strike to his wrist that made him nearly drop his sword. Each exchange saw her taking ground, saw him giving it. The balance was shifting, and everyone watching could see it. "She's winning," Kara breathed from the sidelines, her scarred face lit with fierce hope. "She's actually winning." Darius said nothing, but his hands were clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white. Ravik seemed to realize he was losing control. His attacks became wilder, more desperate. He abandoned technique for raw aggression, swinging his blade like a club, trying to overwhelm Kayla through sheer ferocity. It was exactly what she'd been waiting for. Kayla caught one wild swing on her blade, redirected it past her shoulder, and used the opening to slash across Ravik's sword arm. Not deep enough to disable, not yet, but deep enough to matter. Blood welled up, staining his sleeve crimson. "You can't win," Ravik snarled, but there was something new in his voice, something that hadn't been there before. Doubt. "I already am," Kayla replied. She pressed harder, her attacks coming faster now, forcing Ravik to defend, to react, to abandon all the tactics that had served him for years. And with each exchange, she saw the truth settling over him like a shroud. He'd underestimated her, fatally. The girl he'd left for dead had come back as something he couldn't defeat. Ravik's boot caught on a rock hidden beneath the snow. It was a tiny misstep, barely noticeable, but Kayla noticed everything. She lunged forward with explosive speed, her blade driving straight for his heart. Ravik threw himself backward, barely avoiding the strike, but lost his balance completely. He hit the ground hard, his sword spinning away across the frozen earth. Kayla's blade found his throat before he could rise. The canyon went silent. Ravik lay in the snow, breathing hard, blood running down his face and arm, staring up at the woman who'd just destroyed everything he'd built. "Do it," he rasped. "Finish it." Kayla held the blade steady, feeling the weight of 3 years pressing down on this single moment. She could end him right now. One thrust, one quick movement, justice for her family, vengeance for everyone he'd killed. But as she stared down at him, she realized something. Killing him quickly would be mercy, and Ravik Draven deserved no mercy. "No," she said quietly. "Not yet." She raised her voice so everyone could hear. "By the laws of the challenge, Ravik Draven is defeated. His claim to the Silverwood Pack is forfeit. His lands, his resources, his warriors, all of it reverts to the rightful heir." She looked out at the assembled fighters, Ravik's warriors, who'd followed him for 3 years, believing him invincible. "I am Kayla Vorn, daughter of Marcus Vorn, Luna of the Silverwood Pack by blood and by right, and I claim what is mine." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then one of Ravik's warriors, a grizzled veteran with gray in his beard, stepped forward. He looked at Ravik lying in the snow, then at Kayla standing victorious, and slowly, deliberately, he knelt. "Luna," he said, his voice rough. "We were told you died with your family. We followed Ravik because we thought there was no other choice. If you can prove your bloodline—" "I can," Kayla said. She pulled aside her collar, revealing a birthmark on her left shoulder, the mark of the Vorn bloodline, passed down through generations. A crescent moon surrounded by 3 stars, distinctive and impossible to fake. The veteran's eyes widened. Then he bowed his head. Then we are yours to command, Lunakaela, as we should have been from the beginning. One by one, Ravik's warriors knelt. Not all of them. There were loyalists who remained standing, hands on weapons, faces hard. But enough. More than half the force that had terrorized the northern reach under Ravik's banner now acknowledged Kayla as their rightful leader. Ravik let out a strangled sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. You think they'll follow you? A girl who's been hiding in the wilderness for 3 years? They'll turn on you the moment you show weakness. Maybe, Kayla said, but they won't follow you anymore. That much is certain. She turned to Darius, who stood at the edge of the circle, his expression unreadable. Alpha King, I request sanctuary for myself and those who choose to follow me while we rebuild the Silverwood Pack. In return, I offer alliance and fealty to the throne of the Northern Reach. Darius walked forward slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. When he stood before her, he studied her face for a long moment, really looking at her for the first time, seeing past the disguise of the wandering servant to the Luna beneath. I should have seen it, he said quietly. The way you move, the way you fight. You have your father's eyes. Is that a yes? Kayla asked. A smile tugged at the corner of Darius's mouth. It's a yes. Welcome home, Lunakaela. Though I suspect we're going to have some very interesting conversations about what you've been doing for the past 3 years. I look forward to them, Kayla said. She looked down at Ravik, still lying in the snow. As for you, the challenge is won, but your crimes demand greater justice than a quick death. You murdered my family. You stole my birthright. You terrorized these lands for 3 years. Her voice hardened. You'll stand trial before the assembled packs. You'll answer for every life you took, every village you burned. And when you're found guilty, and you will be, your execution will be public and witnessed so that everyone knows the price of betrayal. Ravik's face twisted with hatred. You self-righteous little... Kayla's boot came down on his chest, cutting off his words. You had your chance to speak. You spent it lying. Now you'll spend the rest of your days waiting for justice. She gestured to Darius's warriors. Bind him. Make sure he doesn't escape. Captain Ridian moved forward with iron shackles, and within moments, Ravik was secured, his hands bound behind his back, a guard on either side. As they hauled him to his feet, Ravik looked at Kyla one last time. This isn't over, he hissed. I have allies you don't know about, resources you can't imagine. Sooner or later you'll hang, Kayla interrupted, and I'll be there to watch. Now get him out of my sight. They dragged him away, still struggling, still spitting threats that grew fainter as distance swallowed them. Kayla stood in the center of the circle, the rising sun painting the snow gold around her, and felt something shift inside her chest. A weight she'd carried for 3 years, the constant pressure of grief and rage, and the burning need for vengeance began, just barely, to lighten. She wasn't whole, wouldn't be for a long time, maybe never. But for the first time since the night her world burned, she could breathe without it hurting quite so much. Kara approached, her scarred face split in a fierce grin. That was the most insane, brilliant thing I've ever seen. You actually did it. We did it, Kayla corrected. Your diversion gave us the opening we needed. Maybe, but you're the one who challenged him to single combat in front of everyone. That took guts I didn't know existed. Kara stuck out her hand. I'm with you. Whatever comes next. Kayla gripped her hand firmly. Thank you. More warriors approached, some from Ravik's former force, others from Darius's company, each offering allegiance, asking questions, seeking direction. Kayla answered as best she could, her mind already racing ahead to everything that needed to happen next. She'd won the challenge, claimed her birthright. But that was just the beginning. Now came the hard part, rebuilding a pack from ashes, forging alliances, proving she could lead not just through combat prowess, but through wisdom and strength of character. And somewhere in all of that, figuring out what this strange connection to Darius Thorne meant, this feeling of recognition that went deeper than shared grief or mutual respect. But those were problems for tomorrow. Today, she'd done the impossible. Today, she'd won. Darius appeared at her elbow, his voice low. We should move. The longer we stay in this canyon, the more vulnerable we are if Ravik's allies decide to make a move. Agreed. Kayla raised her voice. Anyone pledging to the Silverwood Pack, fall in. We march for Black Pine Hold within the hour. Gather your gear and prepare to move." The warriors scattered to comply, the former enemies blending together with surprising ease, united now by the shared witness of something none of them had expected to see. As the camp mobilized around them, Darius pulled Kayla aside, his expression serious. "What you did was brave," he said, "but it was also dangerous. If you'd lost, I didn't. But if you had, it would have strengthened Ravik's position immeasurably, given him legitimacy, proven that the Vorn bloodline was truly extinct." "I know," Kayla said quietly, "but there was no other way. A war would have cost hundreds of lives and might not have ended with Ravik dead. This way, it was just me. One life risked to save many." Darius studied her for a long moment. "You sound like your father." He always thought like that too. The pack before self, the mission before personal safety. Did it get him killed? Eventually, but before that, it made him the best alpha I ever knew. Darius's voice softened. "I'm sorry I didn't recognize you sooner. Sorry I didn't know you were alive and help you when you needed it." "You didn't know I existed," Kayla said. "I was just a child when you and my father fought together, and after the massacre I made sure nobody could find me. That's not on you. Still, I failed him, failed his family." Kayla reached out and gripped his shoulder. "Then help me now. Help me rebuild what Ravik destroyed. Be the ally my father would have trusted. That's how you honor his memory." Darius met her eyes, and something passed between them. An understanding, a promise, the beginning of a bond that went beyond politics or convenience. "Done," he said. "The Northern Reach stands with the Silverwood Pack. Whatever you need." "Right now, I need a hot meal and about 12 hours of sleep," Kayla said wryly. "Everything else can wait." Darius laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his usually stern face. "I think that can be arranged." The march back to Blackpine Hold took most of the day. They moved in good order, scouts ranging ahead and to the flanks, but encountered no resistance. Word of the duel's outcome had apparently spread fast, carried by runners and observers, and anyone who might have considered an ambush thought better of it. By the time they reached the fortress gates, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. But unlike the lonely, cautious approach Kayla had made just weeks before, this time she rode at the front of the column, flanked by Darius on one side and Kara on the other, warriors at her back who'd chosen to follow her. The gates swung open, and the fortress population turned out to watch them enter. Hundreds of faces, all curious, all wondering about the stranger who'd somehow defeated the most feared warrior in the Northern Reach. Kayla sat tall in her saddle, meeting their eyes, letting them see her clearly for the first time. Not a servant, not a drifter, not a victim. A Luna. A leader. A woman who'd taken back what was hers through strength and courage and sheer, unbreakable will. As they rode through the main square, an old woman stepped forward from the crowd. She had white hair and sharp eyes, and she moved with the careful dignity of great age. She stared at Kayla for a long moment, then her eyes widened. "Blessed stars," she whispered. "It's really you, little Kayla Vorn. I was your mother's handmaid before the end. I thought you were dead." Kayla pulled her horse to a stop. "Not dead, just waiting." The old woman's eyes filled with tears. "Your mother would be so proud. Your father, too. You look just like him when he first took up the alpha mantle. Fierce and scared and absolutely determined not to show it." Something in Kayla's chest cracked open at those words. She blinked hard, forcing back the sudden sting of tears. "Thank you," she managed. The old woman bowed deeply. "Welcome home, Luna." And just like that, it felt real. Not just the victory, not just the reclaimed title, but the actual, tangible reality of coming home after 3 years of exile. Kayla climbed down from her horse, suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion, not just physical, but emotional, the weight of everything she'd been carrying finally allowed to rest. Darius was beside her immediately, his hand steadying her elbow. "Easy, you're about to collapse." "I'm fine." "You're a terrible liar. Come on, let's get you inside before you fall over in front of everyone." He guided her through the fortress, the crowd parting before them, whispers following in their wake. Kayla was vaguely aware of climbing stairs, of doors opening and closing, of soft firelight, and the blessed relief of a chair beneath her. When her vision cleared, she found herself in what appeared to be a private sitting room. Comfortable furniture, a crackling fire, walls lined with books and maps. Darius's personal quarters, she realized. He pressed a cup of something warm into her hands. Drink. It's tea with honey. Nothing fancy, but it'll help. Kayla drank, the warmth spreading through her chest, grounding her. Thank you. Darius settled into the chair across from her. We need to talk about what happens next. The political ramifications alone can wait until morning, Kayla interrupted. Right now, I just need... She trailed off, not sure how to finish. To sit in silence with someone who understands, Darius finished quietly. I know the feeling. They sat together as the fire crackled and the fortress settled into evening routines around them, not speaking, not needing to. Two people who'd both lost everything and somehow found a way to keep fighting, to keep breathing, to keep believing that maybe, just maybe, there was still something worth living for on the other side of grief. Eventually, Kayla set down her empty cup. I should go. Let you rest. Stay, Darius said, then seemed surprised by his own words. I mean, if you want. There's a guest chamber attached to this suite. Secure, private, somewhere you can actually sleep without one eye open. Kayla hesitated, then nodded. The thought of returning to the crowded barracks, of fielding questions and managing expectations felt overwhelming right now. Thank you. I'd like that. Darius showed her to the guest chamber, a small but well-appointed room with a real bed, soft blankets, and a window overlooking the mountains. Luxury beyond anything she'd known in 3 years. Sleep as long as you need, he said from the doorway. Tomorrow we start figuring out how to turn victory into lasting peace. But tonight, you've earned rest. Kayla turned to face him. Darius? Why are you doing this, being this kind? Most alphas would see me as a threat, someone with a legitimate claim and a newly loyal fighting force. He was quiet for a moment, considering. Because, he said finally, I look at you and see someone who could have let grief destroy them, who could have given up, given in, let the world break them. But instead, you turn that pain into purpose. That's rare, valuable, and exactly what this broken region need. He paused, then added, almost to himself, and because when I look at you, I see someone who might actually understand what it's like to carry the weight of everyone's expectations while drowning in your own loss. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, understanding, the beginning of something that was more than alliance, deeper than friendship. Good night, Luna Kayla, Darius said softly. Good night, Alpha King. He closed the door, leaving her alone in the quiet room. Kayla stood for a moment, processing everything that had happened. The duel, the victory, the homecoming, the strange, complicated connection forming between her and Darius Thorne. Then she collapsed onto the bed and was asleep before her head fully hit the pillow. For the first time in 3 years, she slept without nightmares. And when dawn broke over Black Pine Hold the next morning, Kayla Vorn woke as what she'd always been meant to be. Not a victim, not a survivor, but a leader ready to rebuild her pack and forge a new future from the ashes of the old. The war wasn't over. Ravik had allies, and there would be challenges ahead, political, military, personal. But today, in this moment, she'd won something she'd thought lost forever. Hope. Hope was a dangerous thing to carry in the Northern Reach, but Kayla woke with it burning in her chest nonetheless. She rose before dawn and stood at the window, watching the first pale light touch the mountain peaks. Somewhere in the fortress below, Ravik sat in chains, waiting for judgment. Somewhere beyond these walls, the scattered remnants of the Silverwood pack were learning that their Luna lived, that the bloodline endured, that everything they'd believed lost might yet be reclaimed. And somewhere deep inside herself, Kayla felt the girl she'd been. The frightened 14-year-old who'd hidden while her family died, finally begin to rest. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Come in, she called. Darius entered, already dressed for the day, carrying 2 steaming cups. Thought you might want coffee. We have a long day ahead. Kayla accepted the cup gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma. Real coffee, not the bitter substitute she'd survived on for 3 years. What's the situation? Complex. Darius moved to stand beside her at the window. Word of your victory spread overnight. I've received messages from 6 pack leaders demanding to know if the rumors are true, if Marcus Vorn's daughter really lives. 3 more want to know if you're claiming sovereignty over Silverwood territory or swearing fealty to my throne. And what did you tell them? That they'll get their answers when we convene the Council of Alphas in 3 days. Every pack leader in the Northern Reach will gather here to witness Ravik's trial and hear your claim directly. Kayla took a sip of coffee, thinking, that's risky, putting all the power players in one place. If someone decides they don't like the new order, then we deal with it, Darius said firmly. But we do it in the open, with witnesses, following the old laws. No more secret murders. No more power grabs in the dark. If the Northern Reach is going to survive, we need to prove that strength and honor can coexist. You sound like my father. I'll take that as a compliment. Darius turned to face her. But before the council convenes, there's something else we need to address. Your pack. The Silverwood survivors. What about them? They're gathering. Word went out through the underground networks. The ones who fled Ravik's purge. The families who've been hiding for 3 years. They're coming here to see if it's true. If you're real. Kayla's throat tightened. How many? We don't know yet. Could be dozens, could be hundreds. But they're coming, Kayla. And they're going to need their Luna to be ready. She set down her coffee cup, her hands suddenly unsteady. What if I'm not? What if I can't be what they need? Darius caught her hands in his, steadying them. You already are. You faced Ravik when everyone else thought he was invincible. You reclaimed your birthright when the entire world believed you dead. You've earned this, Kayla. Now you just have to trust yourself enough to lead. She looked up at him, seeing the absolute conviction in his storm gray eyes. And if I fail, then I'll be right here to help you get back up. His voice softened. You're not alone anymore. Remember that. The moment stretched between them, something unspoken but powerful, a connection forged through shared loss and hard-won survival. Kayla felt her heartbeat quicken, felt the magnetic pull of someone who understood the weight she carried because he bore his own. Before either could say more, another knock interrupted them. Captain Ridian's voice came through the door. Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion, but the first refugees have arrived at the gates. They're asking for Luna Kayla. Kayla pulled her hands free, suddenly nervous. Already? News travels fast in desperate times, Darius said. He offered his arm. Come on, let's show them their Luna has come home. They walked through the fortress together, drawing stares and whispers. By now, everyone knew about the duel, about Kayla's true identity. But seeing her walking beside the Alpha King as an equal, that was something else entirely. The main courtyard was packed with people. Not warriors this time, but families, women clutching children, old men leaning on walking sticks, teenagers with hollow eyes that had seen too much. All of them bore the marks of hard living, of years spent hiding and running and surviving by whatever means necessary. They all turned when Kayla appeared and the courtyard went silent. An older woman stepped forward, thin and weathered, with iron-gray hair and a face carved by grief. She stared at Kayla for a long moment, her eyes searching, desperate to believe but afraid to hope. Show us the mark, she said finally, her voice cracking. Show us you're really her. Kayla didn't hesitate. She pulled aside her collar, revealing the birthmark on her shoulder, the crescent moon and 3 stars that marked the Vorn bloodline. The woman's knees buckled. Someone caught her before she fell, but she was already crying, great, heaving sobs that shook her entire frame. It's true. Sweet mercy, it's true. She's alive. The courtyard erupted. People were crying, laughing, embracing each other. Some fell to their knees in gratitude or relief or sheer overwhelming emotion. Others simply stared at Kayla with expressions of wonder, as if she were a ghost made flesh. And in that moment, Kayla understood the full weight of what she'd taken on. These people had lost everything. Their homes, their families, their entire way of life. They'd spent 3 years in the wilderness, hunted and afraid, clinging to the faint hope that someday, somehow, justice would be done, and they could go home. She was that hope made real. She couldn't afford to fail them. Kayla raised her hands, and gradually the crowd quieted. When she spoke, her voice carried across the courtyard with calm authority. I am Kayla Vorn, daughter of Marcus and Alara Vorn. Luna of the Silverwood Pack. 3 years ago, Ravik Draven murdered my family and stole our lands. He hunted our people, scattered our pack, and tried to erase us from history. She paused, letting the words settle. He failed. We survived. We endured. And yesterday, I reclaimed our birthright by right of challenge and combat. Ravik Draven sits in chains, awaiting trial for his crimes. Our exile is over. The crowd erupted again, but Kayla wasn't finished. But coming home isn't enough. Her voice cut through the noise. We can't just reclaim what was stolen and pretend the last 3 years didn't happen. We have to rebuild. Not the old Silverwood Pack. That's gone, burned away with everything else we lost. We have to build something new, something stronger. A pack that protects its own, that stands against tyranny, that proves survival isn't enough. We have to thrive. She looked out into the sea of faces, seeing hope mixed with exhaustion, determination tangled with fear. It won't be easy. There are enemies who preferred us dead, allies who will test our strength, and challenges we can't even imagine yet. But if we face them together, if we remember what we've already survived and use that to forge something unbreakable, then Ravik's betrayal will be the last thing he ever accomplished. An old man with a scarred face stepped forward. Kayla recognized him. Torvin, one of her father's senior advisors who'd survived the massacre by being away on diplomatic business. "What do you need from us, Luna?" he asked. "Everything you can give," Kayla said honestly. "Your skills, your strength, your loyalty. Help me rebuild not just our pack, but our honor. Help me prove that we're more than victims or survivors. We're warriors, leaders, a family that refuses to break." Torvin knelt, placing his fist over his heart in the traditional gesture of fealty. "Then you have it. All of it. Until my last breath." One by one, the others followed. Young and old, warriors and civilians, people she recognized and complete strangers, all of them kneeling in the snow-dusted courtyard, pledging themselves to the Luna who'd refused to die. Kayla felt tears threatening but forced them back. This wasn't the time for emotion. This was the time for strength. "Rise," she said. "All of you. We're not subjects and ruler here. We're pack, we're family, and family stands together." As they stood, Darius stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of royal authority. "Luna Kayla speaks truth. The Northern Reach has been fractured too long by petty conflicts and power struggles. But today marks a new beginning. The Silverwood Pack is reborn under rightful leadership, and the throne recognizes and supports their sovereignty. Let anyone who challenges this know they challenge me as well." It was a powerful statement, a public declaration of alliance that would shape the political landscape of the entire region. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but they were positive, hopeful. The old woman who'd demanded proof earlier approached Kayla, her weathered face transformed by a tentative smile. "Your mother would be proud, child. She always said you had her fire and your father's steel. I'm glad she was right." "Thank you," Kayla managed. "What's your name?" "Marin. I was your mother's cousin, though we lost touch after she married your father. I've been living in the eastern settlements, helping hide refugee children." "Then your family," Kayla said. "Will you help me now? I need people I can trust, people who remember what the Silverwood Pack was, to help build what it should become." Marin's eyes gleamed. "It would be my honor, Luna." The next 2 days passed in a blur of organization and preparation. The Silverwood refugees kept arriving. By the end of the second day, nearly 300 had gathered at Blackpine Hold, swelling the fortress population and straining its resources. But Darius had made good on his promise of support. He opened his storehouses, provided temporary housing, and assigned his own staff to help manage the logistics of suddenly housing and feeding hundreds of displaced people. And through it all, Kayla worked alongside them. She didn't retreat to some tower to issue commands. She was in the courtyard helping set up tents, in the kitchens organizing meal rotations, in the training yards assessing which of her people had combat skills and which needed protection. She learned names, listened to stories, remembered faces. This was what leadership meant. Not standing above your people, but standing with them. On the third morning, the Council of Alphas convened. The Great Hall of Blackpine Hold had been transformed. Long tables arranged in a U-shape, each position marked with the banner of a different pack. At the head sat Darius, representing the throne. To his right, a newly made banner, Silver Wolf on a green field, marked Kayla's place. The hall filled slowly as pack leaders arrived with their retinues. Kayla watched them enter, reading the body language, the subtle power dynamics. Some came with open curiosity, others with barely concealed hostility. A few, the ones who'd allied with Ravik, looked nervous. Good. They should be. When everyone was assembled, Darius stood. We gather today to address 3 matters. First, the trial of Ravik Draven for crimes against the Vorn bloodline and the Northern Reach. Second, the formal recognition of Kayla Vorn as Luna of the Silverwood Pack. Third, the establishment of new accords to prevent such treachery from happening again. He gestured to the guards. Bring in the prisoner. They dragged Ravik in, still in chains, his face bruised from 3 days in the cells. He looked diminished somehow, smaller, weaker, stripped of the aura of invincibility that had surrounded him for so long, but his eyes still burned with defiant rage. Ravik Draven, Darius intoned. You stand accused of murder, theft, and treachery against a fellow Alpha and his bloodline. How do you answer these charges? Ravik lifted his head. I answer that might makes right. Marcus Vorn was weak. His pack was failing. I did what needed to be done to ensure survival. A rumble of angry voices filled the hall, but Darius raised his hand for silence. Survival through murder? Through burning children alive? Kayla stood, her voice cutting through the noise. You didn't save the Silverwood Pack, Ravik. You butchered it, scattered its people, stole its lands, all for personal power. I made those lands productive again, Ravik snarled. I turned a dying pack into a force that commanded respect. You turned it into a tool for terrorizing innocents, Kayla shot back. Respect isn't earned through fear, it's earned through honor, something you've never understood. She turned to address the assembled alphas. Many of you knew my father, fought beside him, trusted him. When Ravik murdered him and claimed it was a legitimate challenge, how many of you questioned that story? How many investigated? How many stood up and demanded proof? Silence. Uncomfortable, guilty silence. That's what I thought, Kayla said quietly. It was easier to accept Ravik's version, easier to look away. But that silence enabled 3 years of suffering, 3 years of families torn apart, children orphaned, people living in fear. An older alpha, Garen of the Stone Peak Pack, stood reluctantly. What would you have had us do? Challenge Ravik ourselves? Risk our own packs in a war we couldn't win? I would have had you seek truth, Kayla said. Demand evidence. Investigate the circumstances. Use the laws we claim to hold sacred. She paused. But I understand why you didn't. Fear is a powerful motivator, and Ravik cultivated it deliberately. She turned back to the prisoner, which is why his punishment must be equally powerful, not just execution, but a demonstration that treachery will always be answered, that the laws protecting our people matter more than individual power. Another alpha spoke up, Sendra of the Frostbite clan, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s. What do you propose? Public execution, Kayla said. Not quick, not merciful. Witnessed by representatives from every pack, so the message is clear. Betray your own, murder innocents, steal power through treachery, and this is the price. Ravik's face went pale. You can't. I can, Kayla interrupted. By right of challenge, by right of blood, by right of the lives you stole. You wanted to be remembered as powerful? Fine. You'll be remembered as an example. The council voted. It was unanimous. As the guards hauled Ravik away, now screaming threats and curses, Darius stood again. The second matter. Luna Kayla Vorn has proven her bloodline, won her challenge, and demonstrated the leadership required to rebuild the Silverwood Pack. Does any alpha here contest her right to claim sovereignty over those lands and people? The hall was silent. Then Sendra stood. I don't contest it. I support it. The Vorn bloodline has served the Northern Reach with honor for generations. Seeing it restored gives me hope that maybe we can return to those principles. Garen rose next, more slowly. I too support it, and I formally apologize to Luna Kayla for my pack's silence these past 3 years. It was cowardice dressed as pragmatism. It won't happen again. One by one, the alphas stood and acknowledged Kayla's claim. Even those who'd allied with Ravik, faced with the overwhelming consensus and the very real threat of being associated with a condemned traitor, bent the knee. When it was done, Darius smiled. Then let it be recorded. The Silverwood Pack is reborn under Luna Kayla Vorn, recognized by this council and protected by the throne. He gestured to Kayla. Speak, Luna. What vision do you have for your pack? Kayla stood, her heart pounding. This was the moment, the real test. I want to build something different, she said. Not just a pack, but a model. A place where strength serves protection, where power creates safety instead of fear. Where children grow up knowing they're valued, not just for what they can fight or produce, but for who they are. She looked around the hall. The Northern Reach has been at war, with itself, with the neighbors, with the land itself, for too long. We've forgotten that our greatest strength isn't individual power, but collective resilience. We survive winters that would kill softer people. We endure hardships that would break lesser communities. We should be using that strength to build, not destroy. Pretty words, muttered one of the younger alphas, a hot-headed warrior named Breck. But the world doesn't run on philosophy, it runs on who's strongest. Does it? Kayla challenged. Because from where I stand, the strongest warrior in the Northern Reach is currently in chains, about to be executed. Ravik was strong, brutal, feared, and where did that get him? Breck had no answer. True strength, Kayla continued, isn't about how much fear you inspire or how many enemies you defeat. It's about how well you protect your people, how wisely you lead, how completely you earn their loyalty. My father understood that. It made him powerful in ways Ravik never comprehended. She paused, then added, and I intend to prove it works. Darius stood beside her. Then let's make it official. As Alpha King of the Northern Reach, I propose a formal alliance between the throne and the Silverwood Pack. Not subjugation, but partnership. We share resources, intelligence, and military support. We stand together against external threats and work together to create lasting stability. He extended his hand to Kayla. What say you, Luna? Kayla looked at his outstretched hand, understanding the full weight of what he was offering. This wasn't just political alliance, it was trust, partnership. A declaration that they would face the future together as equals. She gripped his hand firmly. I accept. For the Silverwood Pack, and for the future we're building. The hall erupted in applause, some enthusiastic, some reluctant, but all acknowledging that the balance of power in the Northern Reach had fundamentally shifted. As the council moved on to discussing practical matters, trade agreements, border disputes, mutual defense pacts, Kayla felt something settle into place inside her. This was her purpose now, not revenge. That chapter was closed. Not survival. She'd proven she could do that. This was about legacy, about building something that would outlast her, that would justify the sacrifices her family had made and honor the memory of everyone Ravik had killed. The execution took place at dawn the next morning. They erected a platform in the main square, visible to everyone in the fortress and the surrounding area. Witnesses came from every pack, as decreed by the council. Kayla's people stood in silent ranks, faces hard, remembering their own losses. Ravik was brought out in chains, defiant to the end. Kayla stood on the platform beside the executioner, her face expressionless. She'd debated whether to perform the execution herself. It was her right, but ultimately decided against it. This wasn't about personal vengeance anymore. It was about justice, witnessed and acknowledged by the community. Any final words? Darius asked, his voice formal. Ravik spat at Kayla's feet. You think you've won? You think this changes anything? There will always be someone stronger, someone willing to take what they want. Your precious honor will get you killed, just like it killed your father. Maybe, Kayla said quietly, but I'd rather die standing for something than live kneeling to fear. That's the difference between us, Ravik. You never understood that power without principle is just brutality, and brutality always falls eventually. She nodded to the executioner. Proceed. It was quick. Cleaner than Ravik deserved, but Kayla wasn't interested in prolonging suffering. She was interested in closure. When it was done, when Ravik's body hung limp and the crowd began to disperse, Kayla felt the last chains of the past 3 years fall away. She'd done it, avenged her family, reclaimed her birthright, proven that survival could become victory if you refused to give up. But she didn't feel triumphant, just tired and ready to begin the real work. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of construction, organization, and diplomacy. The Silverwood refugees returned to their ancestral lands, scarred by fire and abandonment, but still home. They began rebuilding, using techniques and resources shared by allied packs, creating something that honored the past while embracing the future. Kayla split her time between Silverwood territory and Black Pine Hold, cementing alliances, resolving disputes, and slowly transforming from warrior to leader. And through it all, Darius was there, not hovering or controlling, but supporting, advising when asked, stepping back when needed, proving day after day that partnership meant something real to him. 3 months after Ravik's execution, Kayla stood on a hill overlooking the rebuilt Silverwood settlement. New homes rose where old ones had burned. Fields were being cleared for spring planting. Children played in the streets, actual children, laughing and safe. It looked like hope made solid. Darius rode up beside her, his warhorse snorting in the cold air. Impressive. You've accomplished in 3 months what I would have predicted would take 3 years. I had help, Kayla said. From you. From people who believed when they had every reason not to. You gave them reason, Darius countered. He dismounted and came to stand beside her. The northern reach is changing, Kayla. Other packs are starting to follow your model, protecting instead of dominating, building instead of conquering. You've shifted the entire culture. We've shifted it, Kayla corrected. I couldn't have done this without your support. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the settlement below. After a moment, Darius spoke again, his voice quieter. I've been thinking about something you said during the council, about building a future together. Kayla's heart quickened. Yes? The Northern Reach needs unity. Real unity, not just political alliances that dissolve when convenient. And both our packs need... He paused, choosing his words carefully. We need what comes from partnership, from equal leadership working toward common goals. He turned to face her fully. I'm not talking about political marriage or strategic alliance. I'm talking about something real. 2 people who understand loss and survival and the weight of leadership, choosing to face the future together. Kayla met his eyes, seeing the vulnerability beneath the Alpha's authority. Are you asking what I think you're asking? I'm asking if you'd consider sharing more than just political partnership. If you'd consider sharing a life. Darius's voice was steady, but his eyes were uncertain. I know it's fast. I know we've only really known each other for a few months, but I also know that what we've built together is stronger than anything I've achieved alone. Kayla's mind raced. A month ago, she would have said no, too soon, too complicated, too much risk. But she'd learned something in the crucible of the past few months. Life was short. Love was rare. And when you found someone who understood the darkness you'd walked through and still saw light in you, you didn't let that go. Yes, she said simply. Darius blinked. Yes? Yes, I'll share a life with you. Yes, I'll build this future together. Yes to all of it. She smiled. But on one condition. Name it. We do it as equals, true partners. Not you absorbing my pack or me bending to your authority. We create something new, a unified leadership that respects both our peoples and both our voices. Darius's answering smile transformed his usually stern face. I wouldn't have it any other way. He pulled her close, and they kissed there on the hilltop, the winter sun breaking through clouds to paint the snow gold around them. Below, in the settlement, someone spotted them and let out a cheer. Then another. Soon the entire village was celebrating, even though most of them didn't know exactly what they were celebrating, just that their Luna looked happy, and that was enough. 6 months later, they held a ceremony that united not just 2 people, but 2 packs, 2 philosophies, 2 visions of what the Northern Reach could become. It was held at the border between Silverwood and Black Pine territories, in a clearing that had once been a battlefield, but was now a meadow filled with wildflowers. Representatives from every pack attended, along with hundreds of common people who'd traveled for days just to witness the moment. Kayla wore a dress of silver and green, her pack's colors, embroidered with symbols of strength and renewal. Darius wore the deep blue and gray of his own lineage, his normally stern expression softened by genuine joy. They spoke vows that promised not just love, but partnership in the truest sense. They pledged to lead with wisdom and courage, to protect the vulnerable, to build a future where strength served peace. And when they sealed the union, the crowd's roar echoed off the mountains, a sound of celebration and hope, and the bone-deep relief of people who'd survived darkness and finally seen dawn. Kayla stood beside Darius, his hand in hers, and looked out at the sea of faces. Her people, his people, their people now. She thought about the girl she'd been, terrified and alone, hiding in a cellar while her world burned. She thought about the years of preparation, the hunger for vengeance that had kept her alive when giving up would have been easier. And she thought about what she'd learned, that survival wasn't enough, that vengeance could drive you but couldn't fulfill you, that the truest victory was building something better from the ashes of what was lost. "What are you thinking?" Darius murmured. "That 3 years ago, I thought my life ended," Kayla said. "Turns out it was just beginning." "Ready for the next chapter?" She squeezed his hand. "With you. Always." Together, they turned toward the future, not as victims of the past, but as architects of something new. A northern reach where power served justice, where strength protected the vulnerable, where two broken people had found each other and forged something unbreakable. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, conflicts, enemies who preferred the old ways. But Kayla had learned something essential during her years in the wilderness. When you've survived the worst the world can throw at you, when you've climbed out of hell and claimed your place in the light, nothing can break you. Not fear, not doubt, not the ghosts of the past. You become something more than survival. You become hope, strength, the promise that no matter how dark the night, dawn always comes for those brave enough to wait for it. And as the celebration swirled around them, as their people danced and sang and toasted the future, Kayla Vorn, Luna of Silverwood, partner to the Alpha King, survivor and warrior and leader, smiled. She'd found her way home. Not to a place, but to a purpose. And that was worth more than any vengeance could ever be. 5 years passed like a river carving stone, slowly reshaping the landscape of the northern reach until the world Kayla and Darius had inherited became something their younger selves wouldn't have recognized. The fortress at Blackpine Hold had expanded, its walls now encompassing not just military barracks and administrative halls, but schools where children learned reading and strategy alongside combat. The Silverwood territory had transformed from burned ruins into thriving farmland and carefully managed forests that provided lumber without devastation. But the real change ran deeper than architecture. Kayla stood in the council chamber, now expanded to accommodate twice as many voices, watching as pack leaders debated border access rights with words instead of weapons. The youngest alpha present, a woman barely 25 who'd inherited her position after her father's peaceful retirement, made a proposal about shared hunting grounds that would have been unthinkable in the old days. The deer populations migrate, she argued, gesturing to maps spread across the table. If we coordinate our hunting seasons instead of competing, we maintain healthy herds and everyone eats. It's simple conservation. An older alpha, one of the last holdouts from the previous generation, grumbled but didn't reject it outright. And who enforces these coordination efforts? Who ensures one pack doesn't cheat? "We do," Kayla said, stepping forward. "The unified patrol system we established 2 years ago already monitors borders. Expanding their mandate to include resource management is a natural evolution." Darius added his support. "The Frostbite clan has been using this model for 18 months. Their deer population increased 30% while hunting yields remained stable. The data supports expansion." The debate continued, but Kayla could already see the tide turning. 5 years ago, this conversation would have ended in shouting and threats. Now it would end in compromise and implementation. Progress, she thought. Slow and hard-won, but real. After the session ended, as the alphas filtered out in clusters of conversation, Darius caught Kayla's hand and pulled her toward the private balcony overlooking the training yards. "I have something to show you," he said, his eyes bright with barely contained excitement. "Should I be worried?" "Only if you're opposed to good news." He led her to the eastern overlook, where the view stretched across the valley toward Silverwood territory. But something was different. Where there had been empty wilderness between the two settlements, Kayla now saw construction. Timber frames rising, stone foundations being laid, roads being cleared. "What is that?" she asked. "That," Darius said, pride evident in his voice, is unity. The first settlement built jointly by multiple packs, designed from the ground up to be shared territory. No single pack claims it. Everyone contributes to its defense and governance. It's the physical manifestation of everything we've been working toward. Kayla's breath caught. When did this start? 3 months ago. We kept it quiet until we knew it would work. Kara's been overseeing construction. She sends her regards, by the way, and requests your presence at the foundation ceremony next week. Kayla felt tears prickling her eyes, not of sadness, but of overwhelming gratitude for how far they'd come. My father would have loved this. He always talked about breaking down the barriers between packs, creating something larger than individual territories. Then we're building his dream, Darius said softly, along with ours. He turned to face her fully, his expression shifting to something more serious. There's something else, something I've been waiting for the right moment to discuss. That sounds ominous. Not ominous, just significant. He took both her hands. We've built something remarkable these past 5 years. Changed the fundamental structure of how our people live and govern themselves. But there's one thing we haven't addressed. Kayla's heart began to pound, though she wasn't sure why. Succession, Darius continued. We're not old, but we're also not immortal. And everything we've built, this entire new order, it's held together by our partnership, our personal credibility. If something happened to us, if we couldn't provide clear succession, ambitious individuals could tear it all apart in a generation. You're talking about children, Kayla said quietly. I'm talking about legacy. Darius's grip tightened on her hands. Not just biological children, though, yes, that too if it's what you want, but also about building institutions strong enough to outlast us. Creating a council structure that doesn't depend on individual personalities. Training the next generation of leaders in these new principles so thoroughly that going back to the old ways becomes unthinkable. Kayla considered this, her mind already racing through implications. You're right, we've been so focused on immediate changes that we haven't thought long-term about preserving them. So what do you think? Are we ready to start that conversation? Before Kayla could answer, a commotion erupted from the courtyard below, raised voices, the clatter of hooves, the unmistakable urgency of messengers arriving with important news. They exchanged glances and hurried downstairs. A scout stood in the courtyard, travel-stained and exhausted, surrounded by guards. When she saw Kyla and Darius, she dropped to one knee. Your Majesties, word from the Eastern Territories. They're requesting membership in the Northern Reach Alliance. Darius frowned. The Eastern Territories have been independent for generations. What changed? Their alpha died without clear succession. 3 claimants are fighting for control, and it's escalating towards civil war. They've heard about our governance model, about how we've maintained stability through transition. They want to join rather than tear themselves apart. Kayla and Darius exchanged looks, heavy with meaning. This is what we talked about, Kayla said. The real test. Can our system scale beyond the territories we personally oversee? There's only one way to find out, Darius replied. He turned to the scout. Tell them we'll send a delegation within the week. But make it clear, joining the alliance means accepting our principles. Shared governance, peaceful transition of power, protection of the vulnerable. These aren't negotiable. The scout nodded and hurried off to relay the message. As she left, Kara appeared from the barracks, her scarred face split in a grin. Did I hear right? The Eastern Territories want in? Apparently our reputation precedes us, Kayla said. More like word spread about how we haven't had a major conflict in 4 years, Kara replied. People notice when neighbors stop killing each other. Revolutionary concept, I know. She sobered slightly. But Luna, if we're seriously expanding, we need to talk resources. Training enough peacekeepers to monitor additional territory, establishing supply lines, building the infrastructure to support— I know, Kayla interrupted gently. And you're right, which is why I'm putting you in charge of the expansion planning. Work with Torvin and Marin to develop a comprehensive proposal. We'll review it at next week's council session. Kara's eyes widened. You're trusting me with— You've earned it 10 times over. You helped me survive when I had nothing. You stood beside me when victory seemed impossible. Now help me build something that lasts. Kara's throat worked. It would be my honor, Luna. That night, Kayla and Darius sat in their private chambers, Maps and reports spread across every surface, planning for a future that grew larger and more complex with each passing day. Sometimes I can't believe this is real, Kayla said, staring at the document proposing educational standards for all Alliance territories. 5 years ago, I was sleeping in caves and eating whatever I could hunt. Now I'm deciding curriculum requirements for schools I'll never visit. You've come a long way from that scared girl in the cellar, Darius observed. She's still here, though, Kayla said quietly. Sometimes I wake up and expect to find it was all a dream, that I'm still hiding, still alone, still waiting for courage I'm not sure I have. Darius moved to sit beside her, pulling her close. That fear, that awareness of how fragile everything is, that's what keeps you humble, keeps you working hard instead of taking anything for granted. Your father had it too. Every great leader does. Did you ever meet my mother? Kayla asked suddenly. Once, at a regional gathering when I was barely old enough to hold a sword. She was luminous, strong and gentle at the same time. She made everyone around her feel seen and valued. He paused. You have her gift for that, making people believe in themselves. Kayla leaned into his warmth, feeling the weight of 5 years of growth and change settling around her like a cloak. I want children, she said abruptly. I want to give them the childhood I lost. Want to show them that strength and kindness aren't opposites. Want to build something so stable and good that they never have to know what it's like to hide while their world burns. Then we'll do it, Darius said simply. We'll build that world, for them and for everyone else. They sat together in the firelight, two people who'd found each other in the aftermath of devastation and built something neither could have achieved alone. Outside, the northern reach settled into peaceful evening, guards changing shifts without conflict, families eating dinner without fear, children sleeping safe in their beds because two broken people had refused to let brokenness define them. And in the morning, they would wake and continue the work, building, growing, proving that hope wasn't just survival, it was the foundation of everything worth fighting for. Kayla closed her eyes, Darius's heartbeat steady beneath her ear, and felt something she'd thought lost forever in that burning cellar 5 years ago. Peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of purpose. The knowledge that she'd taken the worst thing that ever happened to her and transformed it into the best thing she could offer the world. That was legacy. That was victory. That was home.